Albert, just a minute, please.
Yeah, I can go. I can time to do my that side.
I can show you my book in Armenian because I am coming from the lecture. My lecture for the pupils in a Catholic school. And that's why I take with me the Armenian version. Based on the posters and then you can find
Yes, պատկանում բանի համար
I think it is the first study about this.
my SQL for this book also in this version and some other authors
Translation.
the whole world knows I don't know.
Կրող կարտապ եք
Թողակի մոտ հայերին
I can find this book in
You know, I sent out it also to several libraries in Turkey. It might be in Istanbul, and I sent it to Ankara, and I know that they received criticism, but they do not understand.
also it's difficult to find Turkish libraries because they always write mistaken the name or titles. Yeah, it's difficult to find because they don't know Armenian.
No, I sent the English version.
English version.
Կողորին դիգել է ձենացի դիգել է ստեղծելու հասնած միշտ բախի գալիս հնում եմ ոչ մեկի չի ստեղծում չնայած պատրաստած է մտի հետո առանց բանան բարիկը եկել ու ասում դե կանոն չասեցի նոր ասեցին իմանա ինչ պատրաստած փենդեմ կովանգի միշտ կան
Property Confiscation.
And then the for this topic, but they don't discuss the result. That time I start to research what about
Look about the which was պատմությունը որը դաշտի բանալիզմ
Չէ, վերջը նստենք, որ եթե շուտենք էլ։
Something changed. Turkey and mostly because of the Turkish Republic. Now started people also
Is for fun.
They are able to
Հայ տարեկան Ալեքսանդրյան
Բարտի քանիսից ամերիկացիներու Չեշային ավելյանը ոդենիտնեկի դաժողովանջը Նեբրասկա
foundation
Actually,
Ես բերմուտ սամանատի Սակիս Բականջան, հիմա ինքը չկա, բայց իր արտիկը սեդ է շատ հայասեր
Belmont Street in essence bana. Belmont Street come to Sitco. Gidemore. Hayır stansiye. Sitco mat hayır stansiye. Hayır.
Ha, pedik yaşasın üstadım. Bu mezgin. Değil mi?
Ես ես մոռանում եմ հաղթել, պապայինն եմ մոռանում։ Ընդհանրապես այս տոններ կան, որ ասենք բոլորը չէ, բայց այս տոններ կան։ Հետո չեմ էլ նայել, դուք ձեզ նայել օրինակ ասենք սենց տոններ հա, ոչ գետերիկ չարժման ավելի մեծ է։ Ոչ տեսա, կարծում եք ես այո, դե ուրեմն իրար
Չի, շային զեպուցում ամեն Հա, դու կարծես եթերը դեպք գնամ սերտան։ Եվ ամենահատը
But of course, first of all, Armenians
Oh, really? David Davidian, the famous David Davidian. I remember 30 years ago.
Yes, sir.
I get this.
Should multi-class come over?
No, this is so fast. That's fast. More should be set.
Richard. That's my great brother. Welcome to Armenia. Haraya kaçtım. Nereye geçtim? Hayır.
How are you?
Hi.
How are you?
Good luck.
Thank you.
How are you? I'm fine.
Good to see you.
I feel too much at home here. You have to know.
You feel too much at home.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
Yeah. Also for me.
I feel like that too.
Usually I don't feel like this. Unfortunately, the last.
Çok şurakan.
Get my email, so the highlights in newspaper.
Yeah, I published. Thank you.
Anytime.
But you know, in Israel, it's like nothing happened. I thought it will be
Sometimes on highlights it's like 350 comments. It was a handful there. I don't know why. I don't understand it. Something really small, everyone has an opinion. Maybe they gave up. Maybe. You know, chicken. Because it's good.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our series of lectures dedicated to the centennial of the Armenian Genocide. This is the ninth in the series, and we'll have a quite rich series going forward for the rest of the spring. So we would like to invite you to take a look at our website to find out more about the events that are being planned for the rest of this month and throughout the rest of the spring. Today we're very fortunate to have with us a leading scholar in the field of Armenian Genocide studies, Mehmet Polatel. His topic, as you can see, is confiscation of Armenian properties during and after the Armenian Genocide, an issue that's been often discussed here in Armenia and throughout the world. Mr. Polatel is a historian focusing on Ottoman history and the Turkish Republic. His research interests are in the field of politics, state formation, social change, nationalism, and of course genocide. He's conducted research on the fate of Armenian property in the Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Turkey. Currently, he is a PhD candidate at Boğaziçi University and a research assistant at the History Department of Koç University in Istanbul. He's a researcher at the International Hrant Dink Foundation. It's a great pleasure to invite Mr. Polatel to give a lecture with us today. We'll have a time at the end for questions. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and I first of all thank you to my friend Davidian and Professor Tom Samuelian to organize this event. I'm really honored to be here. And հայերեն քիչ մեկ խոսիմ իմ սակայն իմ խոսակցությունս անգլերեն վիդեոlla, and sorry for this. And today I will talk about the seizure of, title Seizure of Armenian Properties during and after the genocide. My interest in this subject developed during my studies for my MA degree in History department, and I think this is an academically and politically a very important subject. Armenian properties at the face of the old destruction policy stand as proof of Armenian heritage and communal culture. I think studies regarding property transfer and dispossession of Armenians are important for understanding the complexity of genocide, because dispossession of Armenians and the seizure of Armenian properties were not only a simple change of ownership. It was a crucial part of the genocide policy for the destruction of Armenians and Armenianness. It might be good to elaborate on resources and methodology at this point. There are several sources that are valuable for understanding the Armenian question in the 19th century and the Armenian genocide. British, German, and French national archives are some of them, and features in this regard, and Armenian archives and survivor accounts also provide extensive information regarding this matter. With regards to Ottoman archives, the case is rather complicated. Now the Ottoman archives are open to researchers and contain thousands of important documents. Maybe you can see some of these. These are the legislation parts, the minutes of assemblies, etc. The other is the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. It is Ottoman period. And the other one is Republican archives. It is in Ankara, and it also including some documents relating to genocide. And of course, it is well known that thousands of other documents in Ottoman archives were destroyed in line with the policy of denial. And some sensitive documents are still in military archives, which are not open to every researcher. However, I want to underline that genocide is a big crime which required the operation of state machinery at all levels. Thus, there are traces everywhere, and these are traces that endure years of efforts to erase them and provide important sources for historians. Before going through the details of process of dispossession and property transfer during the genocide, I want to note that the problem did not come out of a blue after a particular decision. In fact, before 1915, seized Armenian properties was one of the most acute problems of the Ottoman Empire. Most of these seizures were carried out during the pre-genocide massacres, but they are not limited to that. And in the 1890s, Armenians were stripped of functioning legal means, and they were seen as internal enemies, and the seizure of Armenian properties gained an everyday characteristic. According to the report of Armenian Patriarchate in 1910, the number of land disputes involving Armenians who had fled to Russia before 1908 alone was over than 40,000. In several cases, whole villages were seized. Most of these pre-1915 seizures took place in the interior and eastern region of empire. I want to show some data from this Patriarchate report. They established a subcommission. The name, you see the name of the report. Hogayin Kravmas Hasnajogovu. These are the communal seizure of the properties, the communal effects. It means that it's part of the properties belonging to monasteries or churches and big lands also. These are the private real estates, belonging to Armenians. These are the monasteries, church cemeteries, and church property lands. And the usurpers in these 1915 cases were not the members of a single group. Among them were local authorities and public officials, other groups resident in the same locality, Circassian immigrants, and Kurdish tribes. After the re-establishment of constitution in 1908, Committee of Union and Progress, the CUP, and Armenian Revolutionary Federation began to conduct talks to reach an agreement. Restitution was the most important item on the agenda. While the CUP was positive about the prospect of restitution in the beginning, it adopted a different policy beginning with 1910 and dragged its feet regarding the return of properties to real owners. So the process of dispossession did not start with the genocide. In fact, it can be seen as one of the factors that provided genocidal motivation on part of perpetrators. With 1915, there were very important changes in the characteristic of the process of seizure. First of all, genocide radically expanded the scale of dispossession and property transfer. As all Armenians were subject to so-called deportation, the number of properties in question increased. And secondly, different from the previous state policies, which included the use of violence, genocide targeted Armenian life in its totality. Thus, community buildings and sacred places were targeted in a specific way. These places were stripped of their meaning, and the state actually tried to annihilate their significance and spiritual meaning. Ordinary people planned to give harm to these buildings, which were considered as the property of the Ottoman state, but they did so anyway. Thus, it can be said that with the genocide, the meaning of confiscation and property transfer became radicalized, and it also gained the characteristic of changing the identity of territories by erasing the marks, signifier, and sacred places of Armenians. Thirdly, genocide introduced new dynamics into this process. As genocide itself was sum of acts orchestrated from the center, central authority became an actor directly involved in seizures. This is not to say that the government had no role in usurpations prior to 1915, but this early role was limited to establishing the ground for violence and encouraging perpetrators. As the state itself became a usurper with the genocide, there occurred a strong motivation on part of the state to handle this process under strict control of the center. This also reflects itself on the way of dispossession and property transfer was carried out. The most striking aspect of state involvement in this process is the fact that the seizure of Armenian properties was carried out within a framework which was intensely regulated by legal means. The Ottoman government issued several decrees, orders, and laws for the seizure of Armenian properties. As it was the case with the laws and order about the deportation, Unionist government made use of judicial methods to provide a legal base for already ongoing policies. This systemic control over the properties and their liquidation also showed that deportation was not brought out as a temporary precaution. Some historians have been trying very hard to prove that deportation was a security measure and the state had no intent to harm Armenians. However, the fact that the state made very detailed plans and enacted several legal measures regarding the allocation, distribution, and usage of the properties of deportees certainly shows that the Armenians were sent to death. Even before they were killed, their properties had begun to be managed as if they actually died. You can see the list which are related to confiscation of Armenian properties, the seizure of Armenian properties. I will not bore with you the details of this law, but here it should be noted that several legal arrangements were used for the legitimization of liquidation of Armenian properties, and Ottoman government continued to liquidate, sell, and distribute these properties systematically under the cover of law. According to these legal frameworks, every Armenian property, from land and factories to shops, livestock, and clothes, would be listed and registered by the state authorities. This is abounded property commissions, and these commissions would keep notebooks indicating the details regarding the quantity and worth of these properties and real owners. What is more, these commissions would also note to whom these properties were sold or assigned in the process of property transfer. And no surprise that these notebooks were not available in Ottoman archives. Mostly they just keep and don't open to researchers, or they maybe destroyed them, because if these notebooks remain and it is available to all researchers, they would bring an extremely powerful light to the scale of this organized crime, the wealth of Armenian people, the identities of the beneficiaries which profit from the process of property transfer. On the other hand, the Talat Pasha's own notebooks, which came to light after almost 100 years, including charts which are based on this commission's notebooks. And this Talat Pasha's notebook give us some sense regarding this content. For instance, these are the Armenian buildings, and this table is extracted from Talat Pasha's own notebook and summarizes the number of empty buildings abandoned by Armenians. These buildings including private house and community facilities. After this brief introduction to legal framework, I want to continue with an analysis regarding the ways in which Armenian properties were seized during the genocide, focusing on the intention and acts of different perpetrator groups. There were interrelated and sometimes overlapping ways in which the Armenians were stripped of their properties. All of this can also be seen as means of psychological and economic violence during the genocide. These are the ways, and the first of this consisted of the seizure of Armenian properties by state authorities and their use for ends determined by the central authority. Extortion and abuses by civil servants and military personnel can be considered as another group. And the third one is the seizure of belongings of Armenians during the massacre on the ground and looting that accompany physical violence. While what prepared the ground for all this was the genocide decision of the central authority, it cannot be said that things went perfectly as planned. Dispossession and property transfer in the later two groups was not welcomed by the government, which strongly desired to be in charge of progress. On the other hand, compliance of local officials and militia was too necessary to be risked during the initial phase of genocide. Thus, the government did not take any significant steps toward them at first. However, several cases of corruption and illegal seizure popped up during the later phases of the Armenian genocide. And as it might be expected, the main usurper during the genocide was the Ottoman state. In parallel to the legal process, Ottoman government distributed Armenian properties by several telegrams and orders issued to locals. It can be said that the government used Armenian properties mainly in three ways. These are the settlement of immigrants, the establishment of national economy, and provision of certain needs of society and state institutions. After Balkan Wars and First World War, Muslims in many regions, from Balkans and Caucasia, had to move into the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman government used the Armenian properties for the settlement and provision of these immigrants in line with its policy of Muslimization and Turkification of Anatolia. Apart from homes, lands and shops, their substitution and clothing were provided from Armenian properties. According to Talat Pasha's own notebook, as early as 1915, a significant amount of Armenian properties were allocated to settlers. As seen in the table, the characteristic of allocated properties varied from land to planting seeds. It should also be noted that the state was not only trying to fulfill an emergent need as settling uprooted Muslim immigrants. This process, including a very true and detailed demographic and social engineering dimension. For instance, the state was very insistent in controlling the density of Kurdish population in the eastern region. Muslim Turkish immigrants were settled in points which were determined carefully and in a way that would not let Kurds to gain a powerful majority after the annihilation of Armenians. The settlement process was so detailed that the state gave properties to settlers in line with their former social positions and occupations. For example, it gave larger lands to those Muslim immigrants who were local notables. The second objective of the central authority was eliminating the non-Muslim bourgeoisie and establishing a national economy dominated by Muslim and Turkish elements. The idea of establishing a national economy, which meant property transfer from non-Muslims to Muslims and Turks, had gained popularity among the high ranks of the CUP in 1913. In line with this policy, it was ordered that local governments would distribute necessary shops, capital and tools to Muslims. Talat Pasha, the Minister of Interior sent an order on 6 January 1916. The Turkification intent was clearly put forward in this order. In the underlying part, the movable property left by the Armenians should be conserved for long-term preservation and for the sake of an increase of Muslim businesses in our country. Companies need to be established strictly made up of Muslims. And this process of property transfer continued during the Republican period. In Adana, last shop in the register of abandoned property commissions had been allocated by 1926. Armenian properties were also used for war efforts and for institutional interest of government agencies. The state gave some buildings to the use of the army, and revenues of crops from vineyards and gardens were also given to the army. Several buildings belonging to Armenians were converted into prison, police stations, school, hospital, and government offices. Moreover, various goods like clothes, drugs, timbers, and tools were used for providing the needs of the army. In May 1916, the Minister of Interior wired a circular ordering research to be conducted on the state of Armenian buildings suitable to converted to prison and whether renovation were necessary on them. For instance, after this research, Armenian church in Antep was converted to a prison that was in effect until 1970s, and in Marash, the Armenian and Catholic churches were converted to prisons. Armenian properties were also converted into the police stations. For example, in Izmit, 3 Armenian community buildings were turned into the police station, and the Ottoman government also made use of abandoned properties for the expenses of militia and for deportation costs. And as you may see here, communal buildings and church properties were also seized by the government. These are the most significant church properties in Adana region. The other list again from Talat Pasha's notebook, and these are the number of seized houses in Adana, and this also shows the extent of seizure during the genocide. Regarding this, the third point, it should be noted that the use of Armenian properties for enhancement of state capacity was especially intense in regions where the central authority had been weak compared to other parts of the empire. Sorry. The second group of seizures were extortion and abuses by civil servants and military personnel. Despite the projections of the center, local officials and military personnel used their power and authority to lay their hands on Armenian properties for their individual interest. This could be seen in case of extortions. Many civil and military officials promised to spare the lives of wealthy Armenians who were willing to pay money. In fact, this was an extortion scheme. It is true that a tiny number of Armenian families were spared, but this was only because they were considered to be necessary by central authorities. For example, blacksmiths in the Diyarbakir region were exempted from deportation after a while because otherwise their services would not be provided in any possible way. Thus, local authorities lacked the authority to provide exemptions, but they promised it anyway. There are several examples of this, but I will only mention one from Adana provinces. In Adana, an Armenian named Hagop Ohanyan assisted police captain Jamal Bey, who had married his sister, in squeezing Armenians for their money in exchange for delay in their deportations. They issued temporary staying permissions. In line with this, a group of richest Adana Armenians collectively paid a sum of 7,000 liras in the name of municipal taxes, which was in reality personal bribes for Jamal Bey and Governor Hakkı Bey. However, once the extortion victims ran out of money to deliver, they were deported anyway. Apart from establishing this kind of extortion schemes or ignoring the escape of certain individuals from deportation convoys in exchange of bribes, local officials also seized certain immovable properties like houses, shops, and lands for their individual use. This was actually forbidden by several orders and rules,
But since their cooperation on the genocide was very important, the state did not take any harsh step against this in the first place. The case of Dr. Mehmet Reşit can be seen as a crystal clear example of how corrupted high-ranking local officials could become during the genocide. Reşit, who is known as the Butcher of Diyarbakır because of his cruelty and violence, was the governor of Diyarbakır during the genocide. According to several witnesses, Reşit looted jewelry, precious stones, carpets and antiquities, and later took them to Istanbul. For example, Dr. Farjalian stated that, I myself saw Reşit Bey arrive at Aleppo by a train bound for Constantinople with 43 boxes of jewelry and 2 cases full of stones. Reşit was convinced that he could get away with this embezzlement and dared to respond an advertisement for a very expensive mansion in Istanbul, which was worth 9,000 liras, Turkish liras. This act raised suspicions. For example, even Minister of Education Ahmet Şükrü Bey would state that it was suspicious that Reşit had arrived Diyarbakır with financial straits but managed to buy that house only 2 years later. Thus, Reşit's carelessness and confidence would jeopardize the enormous wealth he amassed as an investigation would be carried out for his acts. These acts of high-ranking local officials and military personnel had a rub-off effect. Observing the shortcomings of this, the German consular staff wrote, as the more senior officials attempt to enrich themselves in this manner, consider bribery and extortion to be a harmless and permissible act, and compromise the law and state's dignity, naturally they have no moral strength and authority to keep their subordinate officials, judges, doctors, officers, yes, even gendarmes and ordinary soldiers in check. Every public official look for a way to get money at his own discretion. This brings us to seizure and looting during the massacre on the ground. It should be stated that these attacks were carried out by several groups, including gendarmerie and militia, who were tasked with carrying out lethal attacks, and those who were not commissioned for violence but participated in it. And this group also includes ordinary people. The act of gendarmes of Ulukışla in Adana can be seen as an example of this kind of seizure. These men simply acted as an organized crime gang, threatening every deportation convoy, the route of which passed through Ulukışla. They let those convoys that paid the sums they demanded to pass, but kill others who did not. For example, when the convoy from Izmit refused to pay, 7 notables among them were instantly killed by gendarmerie. The deportation itself also was an expropriation process. Ambivalent rumors had spread that Armenians had buried their golds in their houses or gardens, or that Armenians had taken their movable wealth with them, and that the deportation convoys were walking gold mines. Empty houses of Armenian deportees were often searched, ransacked, and their gardens plowed through by Turkish neighbors. On the road, robbery was carried out before or after murder, and in many cases corpses were burned to retrieve any swallowed gold pieces or diamonds. According to a state official, when Sirkezin Ahmet, a special operative who had murdered untold number of Armenians, was arrested, women's rings, bracelets, earrings and jewelry were found when his bags were opened. This vagabond had not sacrificed himself for any idol, but it was clear they had committed murders to get rich. In order to build supporting arguments for denial, some historians have argued that some very well-known mass murderers were investigated and sentenced to death by Ottoman authorities. According to this narrative, some Armenians were murdered by greedy brigands on contrary to the will of the state to protect them. Of course, I will not explore the nonsense of this argument, but just point out that all these trials were carried out for allegation of unlawful seizures. None of these mass murderers like Sirkezin Ahmet or Yakup Cemil were investigated for the massacres they perpetrated. In one of the reports regarding this investigation, it was not that a witness who went on to talk about the murders was objurgated by the president of the commission, who reminded him to answer the question about embezzlement. In fact, the witness was thrown out because of his insistence on talking about the murders. Prominent statesman, poet and publicist Süleyman Nazif commented on this. Talat scorned Reshid the thief, but praised Reshid the murderer. Thus, it is true that some very well-known assailants were punished by the Ottoman government itself, but this punishment was not torturing and killing thousands of people, but for laying hands on what at then became the property of the Ottoman government. Before going into the details of confiscation of Armenian properties after genocide, I want to talk about the effects of dispossession and property transfer on the Armenian people. As I try to summarize, the Armenian genocide was interwoven with complicated and sometimes conflicting form of dispossession and property transfer. The common denominator between the legal framework established by the government and individual acts of usurpers which transgress this framework is the fact that in total they brought with the economic annihilation of Armenian people in the Ottoman Empire. Survivor memoirs. Details which can be reached through an examination of court files, restitution petitions and correspondence between Ottoman officials and institutions show that the process of dispossession and property transfer was much more than merely the loss of material properties and interests for the Armenian people. Destruction of churches and other community buildings and their conversion into prisons and camps as if they had no meaning at all. Looting of houses by Muslim masses, in some cases including neighbors. Loss of belongings of personal value and attachment like wedding rings. The impact of all this cannot be understood as loss of economic means. In fact, dispossession and property transfer were elements of the genocidal violence directed against the Armenian community. Government institutions and authorities, state officials, neighbors, all were aggressively pushing their way on to get whatever they could from the Armenians. Even for those who managed to be spared from deportation through bribes at the initial phase, life was rendered into a long and horrifying waiting. For example, after escaping from prison and deportation convoys many times, Mr. Gazoros Chiplakyan, a very well-known businessman from Istanbul, had managed to turn back to Istanbul. He had seen so many horrors that he could foresee what was waiting him, refusing the threatening suggestion that he could only survive if he paid 500 liras to Commander Reshat Bey and convert to Islam. What worried him the most was the prospect of his family. In the restitution petition he wrote to the British authorities, Chiplakyan said, "I sold all the goods I had in my shop at a very low price. The only reason for doing so was to provide my family as much money as possible, for I did not know what awaited me on the way. I might have been killed, and then the government would unjustly confiscate my shop, sell my goods, as it had done for other Armenians who were exiled, thus depriving my family of its last means of living. Then I explicitly told my wife to give no more bribes to save my life, for nothing would help this time. I was doomed to die." As it is well known, genocides are not the sum of murders and massacres. What differentiates them is the genocidal intent, which is the destruction of a group with its people, with its culture, with its group identity. Thus, genocide targets the existence and life of a particular group of people as such. The process of dispossession and property transfer were clearly part of these attempts to annihilate Armenian life in all aspects. This, of course, had tremendous and horrible effects on those who could survive. Here I want to quote Elis Hagopian's memoirs, which capture the sentiments of dispossessed and the feeling of becoming uprooted this broad wit. Most turned back for a first look at homes in which they had spent a lifetime rearing families, begetting children and grandchildren, cultivating gardens and farms. All was now being left behind: the cattle, folk, precious rugs and silverware, mulberry trees, stores of food and drink. The uprooting was complete, the severing final. the destruction of life as we had known it, home, church, school, wealth, neighbors, vineyards, laden with fruit, fields ripening for the fall harvest was total. As revealed by Hagopian, the dispossession of Ottoman Armenians and the confiscation of Armenian properties was more than a simple change of ownership. It was a crucial part of genocide violence, aimed at the destruction of Armenians and the Armenian life as they know it. In several history books, mostly in Turkey, Armenian genocide and genocide practice that were part of this policy are treated as an Ottoman phenomenon, which has nothing to do with the Republican period. This approach overlooks the fact that in the absence of recognition and justice, this practice continued. In the last part of this presentation, I want to elaborate on the continuities between the Ottoman Empire and the Republican periods with regard to the confiscation of Armenian properties. In 1919, a new Turkish nationalist movement was formed in interior Anatolia led by Mustafa Kemal. This movement established a separate government in Ankara and founded the Turkish Republic after the war. In terms of ideology, cadres and economic policies, there were significant continuities between the CUP and the Kemalist movement. Both were Turkish nationalists. There were several figures from the CUP who played important roles in the Republican period. With regards to confiscation, policies of Kemalists were very similar to those of the CUP. Liquidation and distribution of Armenian properties continue in this period, even though in a different style. Kemalists also used Armenian properties for similar objectives with the CUP. These were primarily the settlement of immigrants and Turkification of economy. The Republic also tried to use Armenian properties for the assimilation of Kurds by settling Turkish immigrants in the region. In terms of economic policies, it should be noted that Armenian properties continue to be distributed to Turkish businessmen and traders with the aim of Turkifying the economy and establishing a Turkish bourgeois. Perhaps the most telling act of the Republican political elite was the distribution of Armenian properties to the families of prominent CUP members who had been central in the organization and implementation of the genocide plan. On 31 May 1926, the Turkish Republic enacted a law for reinstating the honor of leading CUP members through generous endowment. These were leading figures in the genocide. According to the draft of the law, the properties and the money which would be distributed to their families would be taken from the state treasury. But in the parliament, Deputy Recep Bey objected to this and suggested that this should be taken from the reserves of the Armenian Abandoned Property Commissions, which was in charge of managing the distribution of properties. Recep Bey argued that this would be a warning for Armenians. You may assassinate any Turk and might kill him, but we will raise his son with your own money to carve your eyes out, to crack your head tomorrow. This proposal was accepted with cheers and applause, and the state gave generous properties and money to the relative of leading CUP members. These are the list of the CUP members. These are the old people who committed the genocide, and these are the properties given to Cemal Pasha's family, and the other is the Boğazlayan governor Kemal Bey's family. Does the Turkish state continue to use Armenian properties for exerting psychological violence on Armenians? As the Republic continued the policy of denial, these economic practices like confiscation and distribution of Armenian properties continue in following decades. Armenian communal properties, which stood as reminders of Armenian existence and collective life in Anatolia, were targeted by several confiscated initiatives during the history of Turkish Republic. I want to conclude by an example of such post-genocide seizures. One of these is the Pangaltı Supagop Armenian Cemetery. Maybe some of you were here on Monday. Narek Seferian mentioned about the monument established for the victims of Armenians in 1919. This monument is in this cemetery. And Istanbul municipality opened a lawsuit claiming that the cemetery and the church belonging to a Muslim charity named Sultan Beyazıt and thus should be given to the use of the municipality. This cemetery was in fact a very old Armenian property and including the gravestones dating to 1551. What is more, there was a title deed dated 1781 proving that the properties in question belonging to Armenian community. However, the Scientific History Commission, you know Turkey like to establish history commissions, this history commission established for the case ruled out that property belonging to Sultan Beyazıt Foundation rather than Armenian community. And you saw the picture from 1913. There is a funeral procession, and these you see the wall of the cemetery. And in 1939, the cemetery was seized and the church was demolished, Surplusorovich Church was demolished, and the area was open to construction. Today there are several luxury hotels and Turkish State Radio buildings stand on this. The gravestones in the cemetery were used in the restoration of Eminönü Square and the construction of the stairs in Gezi Park. Below the Gezi Park you can see, I think you see the names. Thus, as the denial continued, economic violence and practices like confiscation and seizure of Armenian properties continue in the Republican period. Thank you for listening.
If there are questions, you can come to the microphones on the side and ask them. We'd like to keep it to questions. Answer everyone to speak. We're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A.
Thank you, Mehmet, for your wonderful presentation. You have a pen and a paper next to you?
Sorry?
You have paper and pencil with you?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a few questions. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for being here with us. Number one, General Headquarters Archives. Is there no access, or some people do have access to it? Have you tried to achieve access to the General Headquarters Archives?
General?
Huh? General Headquarters.
General.
Number two, the special organization Teşkilat-i Mesuse, which was the major implementer of the genocide and the great national dispossession of the Armenian people. Does Teşkilat-i Mesuse, in your view, have a separate archive? Is there a Teşkilat-i Mesuse archive that has to be accessed or that has been destroyed? You marking these down? I have a few more to go.
No.
Okay. Methodology issues. You mentioned Cemal Pasha's thousands of acres, but in your settlers point, you talked about 97 acres of orange groves, 5 carts, and 4,390 animals. Now that's maybe the evidence that you have, but when we've lost an entire homeland and a way of life and a civilization, 2,300 churches and 1,500 schools and so on, it seems like it's a disconnect with the complete reality. I know that you're giving that to, you're attributing it to the settlers, so that's that. A little bit about your background, if you will. Where are you from? What are you about? What do you do when you write about these things in Turkey? Next. You're a historian, you're a scholar. Do you have anything to tell us about what to do next? What to do? Or that's for us. Obviously, we've got to figure it out ourselves. But as a friend, as someone who is committed to the truth and justice, what do you have to say about that? Turkey perhaps is the only country in the world, I'm not sure, I don't know all the languages of the world, where citizenship is translated or is presented as belonging to the homeland, vatandash. Not citizenship per se, but belonging to the homeland. Can vatandash ever, in your opinion, in the nearer middle range future, belong to the Armenian people, belonging to our homeland, east or west? And finally, at the end of your presentation, you showed the funeral. What was that, that suburb of Istanbul called? Bolis called? Pangaltı. Among all the bad things that have gone on there, maybe there's a return of a cemetery that's gone on yesterday or today. But there's the Nostalgia bookstore at Pangaltı, which sells not only our son's book, but many books on the Armenian Genocide. And I think that's the generation you represent. So thank you.
Thank you guys. Just take them one at a time, and if you need to recall something, I'm sure that we'll be able to help you. Please.
Okay. The archives of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, I think that there are a lot of discussion about this, but there is no any sign or any documents about the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa or the secret organization. They are important, but just do some memoirs of Yakup Cemil published in the newspaper in 1930s, his memoirs. That is it. Unfortunately, yeah, the Ottoman archives is open, but of course a lot of documents were destroyed or lost or burned. That's all. The general court, I don't understand the first.
The military headquarters.
Headquarters, yeah, military archives is in theory open. I couldn't apply yet, and I don't want to apply and take a rejection, but maybe in near future I apply. But in this you cannot see all documents. The military personnel choose the documents who relate to your topic and give you. And I know that some people who work in these archives, but they are studying on the 1854 Crimean War, and so the military don't see any threat studying on this. And for my background, I'm originally from Kars, but my family came from Georgia, and I am now living in Istanbul and working on and finish my PhD. Your question, I just showed some list. Of course, it is not. I'm not able to show all lost of cultures or Armenian heritage, but of course there are more.
I guess one of the other issues was what to do next. Do you have any suggestions? What are you doing next? What are the things you're working on?
Really, I don't know.
That's okay.
Maybe after that, of course, I continue to study on this, but I don't know, maybe if I found really think that to prove this kind of properties, maybe it can be used in near future as the negotiation, for negotiation.
Very good. Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. You are a very courageous human being, a scholar. Can I ask you why you are doing this? Why you are studying this subject? And secondly, what are the reactions of your colleagues about what you are doing? Did they accept your study? Did you respect you? Or as in a way you are isolated in the Turkish University? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm interested in this topic after 2007, mostly in my beginning of the presentation, I said that it's politically and academically very important topic. First of all, I'm politically interested in this topic because I'm a leftist person, and in Turkey I always thinking about the past of Turkey and to change the country, etc. That is why this topic is interesting me. And academically also, I said that the Turkish history books said that some Turkish history books, the Armenians were deported or massacred during the war, and then they start to explain the establishment of republic and the republican politics. But they didn't talk about, or they didn't take anything about how the killing or deportation of 1,500,000 Armenians affect the republic or affect the establishment of republican society. That's why I try to ask a question in academic sense. What happened after Armenians killed? And then I reach this kind of topic. And yeah, in university, in Istanbul there are some universities who were open-minded and they and free to discuss all topics. But in Koç University I have not faced any problem. First of all, I'm not isolated, but of course, if I try to find a job in state universities, I couldn't find anything, but I'm not isolated because there are a lot of civil NGOs or academicians who also recognize genocide, and it is not a problem.
A little more question. You speak about your academic wish to study the subject. Did you feel that you have also a moral mission to do it? A moral?
Moral? Yeah, I say that politically is also the moral concern led me to discussion. It is not just academic, it is political and moral concerns.
Please.
Well, is there anybody among your colleagues, or maybe you yourself, aren't interested in the issue of comparison of the methodology of seizure of Armenian property with the methodology used by Nazis during the Holocaust?
Unfortunately, I'm interested, but not any colleague in Turkey. People, also some scholars freely recognize the genocide or write newspaper articles about this, about recognition issue, but they don't actually study on this issue. And there are not any scholars who just work on the Holocaust. They don't have, because they know that if they study on Holocaust, they will face a question of Armenian genocide. And they don't want to answer this kind of question. But in recent years, some academicians start to study on these topics, not comparison, but Holocaust or Holocaust memoirs, or the role of Turkey in Holocaust period, etc. That's all.
Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Nona Shahrazarian and I am a social anthropologist. I would like to know your major, please.
Major? International relations.
International. So,
but now history.
Sure. I represent an institute of archaeology and ethnography, and my question is about Syria. I would like to know if you see any link, any connection between the genocidal behavior and social envy, because what we can see, what you told here.
It's a little hard to hear you, so we're going to bring the microphone over.
So just please, if you can give us a bit of theory, if you of course you've read something, if there is some determinants between these two things, between genocidal behavior and social envy and this robbery and how to say this anger and desire to take somebody else's property. Thank you.
During the genocide.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't have a specific example, but we know that neighbors or others directly involved in this, but I don't understand.
So my question is, if this genocidal behavior performed by Turkish official state is directly connected to this social envy and their desire to take over this possession.
Sorry? Yeah, I understood. Yeah, this, there's some sign about this. For instance, some Turkish intellectuals in that time, the CUP intellectuals, writing an article in their journals in 1930s, 1940s, they always mention about the wealth of Armenians. When they mention about the Eskişehir or other vilayets, they say that Armenians are in the commerce or the other regions, but Muslims are just the state officials. It is not acceptable. Yet this kind of jealousy is a fact. Mostly the participation of neighbors in the seizure process. But I don't know the specific example right now. But I know that some parts is related.
I think our next, if your next speaker would come up, just the microphone is over here. You just pass it on. Thank you.
I also want to thank you for a very interesting presentation. And my question is, in the universities, like your university, are there many young people like you who pursue this and they really go after the truth, or they're keen on learning, or you're a very unique individual? What are the numbers? Do you have an idea?
I have no numbers, but I know that many. Not, of course, it's not all universities. Boğaziçi, Koç, Sabancı, Bilgi, there are a lot of students. And also, in last 10 years, a lot of students from Turkey go outside and take their degrees in America or Europe. They always change. And they always, they are not maybe directly study on the genocide or the others, but they recognize and they struggle for the recognition process. And I know that many students, maybe more than 10 or 15 in some universities, directly study on the history of regions and also the genocide.
I think we have time for a few more questions. One over here, one back there.
I also would like to thank you for very good research and very interesting presentation. I have maybe two questions. One is, there are some collections of memoirs of genocide survivors. And you mentioned that neighbors, friends were directly involved in genocide in this process. I wonder if there are any collections of memories by Turks or Kurds, maybe how they behaved, their grandparents. Are there any collections of those? That's number one. And are there still any possibilities of conducting this kind of research today? Maybe someone who is in his or her 80s, 90s, they could have good memories, a lot of information on how that things actually happened, what were their parents doing, etc. So, are there any collections? That's number one. And is there still a possibility of doing this kind of research?
Yeah, there are available memoirs by perpetrator or just the bystanders and witnessed the genocide process. Yeah, there are, I don't know the numbers, but I know that there are also the available of the CUP members' memoirs. They also mention about Dr. Reşit's memoirs, Talat Pasha's memoirs, or Hüseyin Cahit Yalçın's memoirs. They are the central, the high-rank officials of CUP. And in recent years, there are a lot of studies using the oral history method, and they reach the old people and talk about this. But it is mostly conducted in Diyarbakır or this kind of region because of the Kurdish movement. Kurdish people started to talk about the past, and they compare their victimization by state to Armenians' ones, and they eagerly talk about the genocide practices. And I know that my friends also conduct this research in Diyarbakır, and now they published a book about it, and it is now rising. There are a lot of.
May I ask a follow-up question? Are we allowed to?
Sure.
Yeah. The other part of this, there's a lot of literature on how genocide has affected Armenian culture, maybe mindset, even generations apart. Do you think that genocide has also affected Turkish culture, and how? You might not have done an academic research on this, but you probably have some observations. I would be thankful if you could share those.
Yeah, of course. They affect all part of the Turkish or Kurdish community or Kurdish culture, because it is the big loss also. It is not just how can I say, it is, of course, it is not the loss of Armenian culture, it is loss of Turkish culture too, because this kind of, the Armenians, a lot of heritage on Turkish society or establishment of Ottoman or Turkish state and culture, the agricultural or commerce or other kinds of. After that, these are also lost of Turks, and Turkey now, it's just a nation state and not many heritage. And also, if people want to start the re-establishment of the history, they always face the Armenian heritage. But of course they don't touch on that.
Please.
My question, I have actually 2 points. The first is, I guess it would have been a nice idea to give the outline of the level of research of this topic, because the audience should know that some portions, some sections of this problem have been already studied in Turkey. And for instance, Umid Kurti, he's writing his dissertation on this subject about Aintab. So it would have been a good idea to provide this outline. And the second is, I guess it's going to be a tremendously difficult task for you to cover the whole property that was seized, confiscated, and distributed. I guess it's the methodology of some of the Turkish scholars is wise enough. So they have taken specific regions of the Ottoman Empire and tried to build the local picture. I guess it's one of the correct ways of approaching to the problem, because otherwise it can take years and years, and not only to present but also to quantify in terms of the damage, and as you presented during the negotiations, if that can come up one day or another. So it can be very easy and a very easy way. So I'm sure, well, there are lots of regions and in the Ottoman Empire. So I guess if you in Turkey, because you have the access to the archives, you build this methodology, this framework, I guess it's going to be much easier for you to rebuild the picture and try to see what happened to the Armenian properties.
Yeah, you are right. Of course, I am also in MA studies. I focus on Adana region mostly. I give a general picture and then directly focus on Adana. And yes, Ümit and other my friends, a lot of start to study. I know that some friends focus on Harput, other Erzurum, and Muş. And now I start to focus on Bitlis, Muş, Adana, and Diyarbakır. I try to compare all these regions, and this, of course, enlarged our vision of society. Otherwise, it's impossible. If maybe we can find the notebooks of commissions, it is easy. Or the title deeds of his archives is open. It is really easy. Not the history part, but the property part. But now, as you said, the local history is necessary.
Please.
Hi, ma'am.
Hello, Mehmet. This may be outside your scope of research, but I just wanted to ask. Now, there's very few cases that are trying to get. There's some Turkish Armenians that are trying to get properties back, maybe in Sivas in different parts, and of course they have their own legal cases. But do you see a connection with when the French left Hatay, and there's many Arabs, Alawis, and Armenians that have moved to Syria, that have lost their properties in Hatay? And they have cases ever since the 80s. They've been trying to open up cases. Have you come across any literature or any? Do you see any connections with between those property losses and those Armenians and other minorities trying to get their properties with the genocide and Republican period? Do you see any connection, or is there any literature about the issue?
No, I think there's not directly related, but in Turkey there are very, very few court cases about properties relating to genocide, and the state is not allowed to discuss this kind of question. The Hatay is a different topic. Armenians also lost a lot of. I know that some Armenian church converted into the school in 1942, but there's not any court about this.
Is there any historical, is there any books that talk about those properties or any?
No, not yet.
No? Thank you, Mehmet.
Yair, Narek, and then, okay, maybe in that order.
Another time I want to thank you very much. I have two
microphone. Use the microphone.
Another time I want to thank you very much into you're a courageous scholar, and I appreciate it very much. I want to ask about Turk rescuers. I know that the Armenians avoiding a while this issue because of the actual situation between Turks and Armenians, but for sure I'm studying this topic of rescuer in different cases of genocide. Do you have a little information about Turks, Muslims who saved Armenian Christians during the genocide? It's very important to people to know that there were people like this in every genocide. We have not to speak only about the perpetrator, we have to speak also about these human beings, great human beings. If you can tell us a little bit. Second question about the recognition. Do you think that the Armenians are frustrated because of the situation? I think in the near future, not Turkey, and unfortunately not my country, Israel, will recognize the genocide. But in my opinion, if there is a case that Turkey will recognize, it is if Israel will recognize, and then US must recognize, and then Turkey has no chance by recognizing. I don't want to develop the theory, but I think this is, if Israel will recognize, it's not only another state who will recognize, US has no chance but to recognize, and then you must recognize. But regarding Turkey itself, I know that you are not alone, you are few, but not very few. In the civil society in Turkey, there is a beginning of thinking about this, and there are people who are saying their voices openly. I'm happy that my book is now translated into Turkish by a Turkish editor. I think that if in the civil society of Turkey, combined by pressure from outside, this can bring to a certain progress to the recognition. What do you think about it? Thank you again.
Can you explain the first question?
About Turks who saved Armenians.
Turks save Armenians.
During the genocide.
For the first one, yeah, there are some news about some studies about the Turks or Kurds saving the Armenians. But I'm not directly studying on this, and I couldn't see any example about this. So, I don't. Yeah. For the recognition part, yes, now in Turkish civil society, they are talking about recognition, etc. I'm not sure it is enough to push the state to recognition, but maybe we also talk about these people who recognize the genocide, because a few days ago Tanrıkcan wrote an article about recognition issue in Turkish in Tarat newspaper. He criticized the Turkish intellectuals who recognized the genocide, because he said that they always, the people who recognize the genocide in Turkey, always think the genocide issue as an instrument for the democratization of Turkey. Now, as you know, Turkey is a not democratic country and always struggle for democracy. And now people start to push the state, and they say that if the state can become democrat or democratized, and then the genocide issue will be easily recognized. I'm not sure, because it's not about the democratization of Turkey, it's about the justice, and democratization does not mean that it brings out the justice. Maybe Tanrıkcan also criticized these intellectuals about that they don't have any connection with diaspora or Armenian institutions, civil society groups. And that is why most people don't know what Armenians demand or what is the demand of Armenians. There are the important things. It's not about the Turks demand, Turkish people's demand or Turkish intellectuals demand about the recognition. It is about what Armenians want and how the Turkish people who recognize the genocide make to realize these demands and what they doing about this. Maybe this kind of dialogues between Turkish or the institutions or NGOs and the diaspora institutions, maybe this kind of collaboration improve our struggles, I think.
Very good. We'll take one or two more questions and we'll wrap up. Ali?
Thank you very much, Mr. Polatel. Fascinating topic, very important. I was wondering about those Armenians who continued to live in Anatolia after the genocide. From what I know, it could be tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, and slowly, by the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was the move towards Istanbul. But meanwhile, what was their relation to their properties? Did they own their homes? Were there functioning churches? What happened in between during those years?
Yeah. In 1918, after the war and the change of the Ottoman government, and the survivors start to come to Ottoman again, and in Diyarbakır or in other regions. And we know that after the 1918, there was a commission established by British Consulate and Ottoman government together to give these properties back. And when Armenians return, they can easily take this kind of properties. And after that, they take. But churches or monasteries or this kind of the communal buildings were not returned back, because after the establishment of the Republic, this commission dismissed and new laws adopted about this issue, and we tried to find the traces of this church and their properties, but we couldn't reach documents about this. But I know that some Armenians have no problem to take your properties, but some of them just can take their house, but not the lands or etc. And we know that the sale of Armenian properties by the state continued in 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s.
Just one or two. Did you stop a question, Nana? No.
Thank you.
Question? Please. This will be our last question, then we'll wrap up. We've been going for a while. We can continue informally afterwards.
My name is Vilen Khachatrian. I'm an economist. I want to ask a question in that aspect. For example, you are bringing examples, your churches, homes, land, and etc. Have you any economic account how much money, for example, Turkey must pay Armenia for rare property, I don't know, using? And second one, I'm thinking that you can find traces or information about Armenian property in your central cadastre, where you have electronic information, and that information they are giving your special services, and we are in strong defense system. We are trying not to show anything, and I'm thinking that if you are trying, if you have any access to your archives, you can get this kind of information. And the next one, what are you thinking? Our society just now asking you some questions, our lecture room asking you questions. Before lecture, what are you thinking? What we must ask you? When you are reading lecture, you are preparing any questions, what we must ask you. Okay?
Okay. Really, I don't know how the money or the compensation can be given, because a lot of properties, and we don't know the real numbers of these properties. Billion, I know, but how much? They don't any news about studies about that. So, and the third is which kind of question. I don't know how I can reply this question, but I am comfortable, no problem.
Thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts with us. This is a very big topic, as we know. A lot more was lost just in the properties. There was a whole habitat, a homeland. There's cultural patrimony and natural patrimony, which really, when you add it all up, adds up to a lot more than all these individual pieces of property together, movable, immovable, and so forth. And we have to always bear that in mind when we talk about what compensation is due. How do you make the Armenian nation whole for the damage that was done by the genocide? But it's clearly clear that this property damage, this taking of the property illegally, was a part of the plan. It was the completion of the destruction of the Armenians in their homeland. And I think that's really important to always keep in mind. Thank you so much.